Geworfenheit as Lichtung. Uh, this is um, this is Lichtung, and Lichtung, um, which is then controversially sometimes put down as in Zizek as the supertranscendentalism, is the attempt to go prior to the eidos and physis. I think in the book on the history of being, where being is spelled with a Y, there's an account of which one Heidegger thinks is prior, whether it's the eidos or physis. I would guess physis. But it could easily be eidos. I'm really not sure. So, for the archaic Greeks, there was already this notion. So archaic means prior to the period when the philosophers properly arose. So the pre-Socratics is the division between archaic and classical is not made by people who are primarily concerned with philosophy, but their consideration is more general philology. This distinction is made by, I believe, by classical scholars rather than historians, but in fact it may have been made by historians. But in either case, it's not chiefly concerned with making this kind of division between the Socrates and the pre-Socratics, or any division specifically concerned with philosophy. But nonetheless, it corresponds roughly to the classical period when Socrates and Plato were around, and the archaic period when you push back into Iliad, Odyssey, and the epic cycle, and so forth. In this period, then in the archaic period, physis basically meant any order which was like that of a workman, like that produced by handicraft or by artisanal work. So this is the origin of why, this is why Gadamer still says Heidegger saw Platon as this one who had the worker god, the workman god. The technological essence is already there, because the thought of this thing, so Socrates was famous in the popular version for walking around asking people what they thought about things and so forth, and going in the agora, in the common, among the koine, or the common, the vulgar people, the ordinary people, and asking these questions. Which I believe is patently and totally false. But so actually, who did he talk to? Is basically the sons of the rich and other skilled discussants who had been quote unquote been housebroken. Let's say they'd been housebroken. They didn't. They knew how to hold a discussion in a controlled way, which is so as though some kind of handicraftman of the mind had devised rules in which to hold a discussion, which if you don't follow them, then we can say that you're not housebroken yet, so we can't let you into the discussion. This image of regularities, which, let's say, includes the tides, includes some awareness that the forests have cycles. I don't mean just the 4 seasons of the year, but also um, that forest as a whole. Sometimes there's fire, and that there's some kind of concept which is a little bit similar to the modern concept of environment. Having some kind of ecosystem is what I meant, actually, an ecosystem. So that there's some kind of cosmos, as it were, going on in the microcosmos. These things. So think of the. I think there's a really good book on this by Dilthey on the origins of language. No, maybe it's not. You know who it is? It's the guy Heidegger debated with in Davos, Cassira. Yeah, there's a really good book by Cassira on this, on the origins of language. So let's look at how powerful this thought is, that the artisanal worker, so say, what I was getting to is that Socrates also hung out not in the agora itself, but in the sort of some kind of tonswain or leather worker or saddle maker or something on the edge of the agora, because the sons of the rich weren't allowed to go in the agora, but they could only go to the edge of it, and that's one of the big places Socrates historically did hang out. So that kind of work, like making a saddle, being said to be the same on what we would usually say on metaphor as a mental work, such as making rules of how to hold a discussion, pushes us back into the question of what is a metaphor. So, of course, a simile is saying something is like something, making a comparison, right? But a metaphor is saying what something is. So it's saying the meaning. A metaphor is saying the meaning. So, if Macbeth is talking about everything being sound and fury signifying nothing, this is a Dasein in probably in extreme misery, right? So he says everything is, this is just full of sound and fury signifying nothing. So that's stating the meaning. Or if, in Hamlet, the famous saying, "All the world's a stage," and the men and women merely the actors in it, and who delivered their set lines and so forth. Again, that's stating the meaning. It's not saying it's like that we should make a comparison, but it's saying that's what it is. So this workman-like image is very powerful in the Western way of thinking. So we think of physis or nature as something like the work of a craftsman. And therefore something that potentially could be done by a human being, basically. So on the other side of this division of the Lichtung or Geworfenheit, or the so-called super transcendence in the Zizek version, is supposed to send us back prior to is the eidos, which is the look of things. So we get this very great division in Western thinking between the things that are eidos friendly, or in some way susceptible of visualizing, and the things which we can only get to through speech. So in a way, we can show the essence of Nietzsche, the question of which one could answer and come out on Nietzsche's side or not on Nietzsche's side in the core respect, is the question could be given through the question whether we can actually have we actually have the eidos of infinity. Can we actually picture infinity, in other words? So Nietzsche's position we could take to mean if we can picture infinity, we have the eidos of it. And likewise, and so say we're at a certain amount of intelligence, you go a little bit farther, and then you say there's the absolute perfect infinite, which is God. So his question is, do we actually have this eidos? So the question is, we could say, is the question of infinity? So do we have the eidos of infinity is then the Nietzschean question. And if we do, then this means there is a God. And then if you admit that they don't, then this is the God is tot, and instead this movement. So let's say you even tried to picture infinity. If you give it a try, say spatial infinity. Picture space, picture black space, sheer darkness, lingering in the greatest profundity of darkness, which then how do you picture it as somehow radiating out, somehow moving? There must be some wave coming out so that we can think of it as infinity. Otherwise it would just be, a pool of darkness? It seems like we have to picture something like liquid spreading out over tabletop, or like something that's a wave movement, or a sun like radiates, or something. We have to have some movement. Otherwise, how do we signal to ourselves as a eidos that we're talking about infinity? It's a difficult question, but I think it can be overlaid on the whole through many intricacies. It can be overlaid on everything in current human discussion. So the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, Fukuyamaism, etc., etc. Everything that's issuing from the West can be addressed with that meaning or metaphor of the infinity question. And then you can see Dostoevsky and in a different way, subtly different way, Heidegger are on the side of saying this Platonic shopwork maker God must be set aside, and that goes with truth. So Dostoevsky has said, if it's against truth, but if it's a question of the contest between Christ and truth, he'll stay with Christ. So truth is on the side of the Platonic clockwork God, and then Dostoevsky and the Ruski Mir in the Russian world is saying, he's not saying we repudiate that, we reject that. He's saying, if that's what it comes to, that's the side I'm on. So in a different way, Heidegger, not because he's making a statement of faith, but because he tries to test the Western Dasein, the Western civilization, and see if what we're basing things on is good enough. And so then he concludes, well, there's a problem with this initial meaning that we're in, the identity of the fusus and the regular activity of some kind of artisan, so that the techne concept comes out of that. There's kind of a problem there. The other side, the eidos, not exactly sure if he has decided that eidos has to go or not. That is a more subtle, but in a way he says that it does, because he's left back to the supposed Geworfenheit, or this ground, which, if you put it in what he said to Husserl, so Husserl said, observed that the Greeks, where Nietzsche says there's the first theoretical man, Socrates, at this moment, this standing back, this being neutral, this starting to praise being neutral, rather than being involved, rather than being party political, or party political in some higher sense, as in ideal, as in the rationalism versus empiricism debate, which is also a party issue, right? But just in a higher sense, it's an attempt to stand back in what we attribute to mathematical thinking, in the supposed neutrality, has to do with the theoretical attitude, and against that is supposedly the natural attitude. So, taken from that way, Heidegger says there must be some world there already before you take the pivot between theoretical and natural attitudes. So that's another way of looking at this supposed position of the Lichtung, which when we then try to express it theoretically, it's like we have some kind of leaden ball on the end of an iron chain or so, whereas we don't, instead of standing in the Lichtung itself, we speak from the ball and chain, which is going into the theoretical attitude and then saying something like, oh, so this is a neutral monism or something, or giving an account which then puts us into the theoretical attitude, which is already to miss the moment of the, which is not a moment, because I was going to say the moment of the Lichtung. But if you say that, then you become like Whitehead. You become, so John Dupree has said Whitehead is not what he's always said to be, a process philosopher. Why? Because he has some kind of atomic moments, theoretical moments, where he says, it's like something happens now. So Whitehead is not the same as the rubber band example from Bergson with duration, or better, Goethe hallucinating the growing of or the opening of a blossom, holding that in his mind's eye before him with great vividness. Instead, there's little moments. So the same way, if we come out from a moment where we supposedly stop, written it down, like Hegel says about time, said at this moment we knew this. Again, we're not then in the Lichtung, in Dasein, as Heidegger is directing us to see.